The map that killed the dream picture, a smoke-filled conference room in Tokyo, late 1942. On the wall hangs a huge map of the Pacific. At first glance, it looks glorious. Japanese flags scattered across Southeast Asia, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, much of China, and a chain of captured islands. Then someone overlays another sheet of paper. American shipbuilding numbers, aircraft production, steel output, and oil reserves. In that moment, the mood changes. Even the most optimistic officers can see it. America has more factories, more ships on the way, more planes rolling off the lines and ocean space to keep them safe while they are built. No matter how brave Japan's soldiers are, they cannot erase those numbers. And everyone in that room understands one thing. We can hurt the United States. We can never invade it and hold it. Japan's real plan. Shock, then bargain. Before Pearl Harbor, Japan's top planners already knew they could not march on Los Angeles or occupy New York. They simply did not have the industry, population, or shipping to launch that kind of war. Instead, their strategy was built around a gamble. Deliver a surprise blow at Pearl Harbor, seize a wide, defensive perimeter rich in oil and raw materials, fortify island bases into strongpoints, win one or two decisive battles at sea, then force Washington to accept a negotiated peace that left Japan's empire mostly intact. In other words, the goal was not to conquer America, but to make the war so expensive and painful that Americans would decide it wasn't worth continuing. On propaganda posters, this sometimes sounded like crushing America. In real planning documents, it was about buying time and bargaining from a position of strength. Midway, Guadalcanal, and the end of the illusion for a few months after Pearl Harbor. Everything seemed to go Japan's way. Singapore fell. The Philippines surrendered. The Imperial Navy looked unbeatable. Then the ceiling arrived. At the Battle of Midway, Japan lost 4 frontline carriers and many of its best naval aviators. Those aircrews were almost impossible to replace quickly. Soon after, at Guadalcanal, Japanese forces fought bravely but bled themselves dry in a grinding battle of attrition that favored American industry. Step by step, the reality became impossible to ignore. The United States was replacing ships and planes faster than Japan could sink them. New U.S. carriers kept appearing in the Pacific. Fresh, well-trained pilots arrived in squadrons that never seemed to run out by the end of 1942. Many senior Japanese leaders privately accepted that victory in a long war was out of reach. The question was no longer, how do we win, but how do we hold on long enough to get a better peace than unconditional surrender? Why invading America was never on the table. At this point, it's worth being blunt. Japan never had a serious, practical plan to invade the continental United States. 3 hard limits made it fantasy. Distance. The Pacific Ocean is vast. Moving and supplying an invasion force across thousands of kilometers against a growing U.S. Navy was simply impossible with Japan's shipping and fuel situation. Industry. America had more people, more steel, more oil, and much larger shipyards and aircraft factories. Japan was struggling just to keep its existing garrison supplied, let alone launch a huge offensive toward California. Logistics and submarines. Japanese merchant shipping was weakly protected. Once American submarines and aircraft began sinking tankers and transports in large numbers, even feeding the home islands became difficult. A trans-Pacific invasion force would have been a slow, easy target. Japanese planners understood this perfectly well. Their real nightmare was the reverse scenario. America invading Japan. When the invasion arrow flipped by 1944, Japan's empire was shrinking. Island after island fell to U.S. forces. The remaining bases were cut off, starving for fuel and ammunition. In Washington, American planners began drafting Operation Downfall, a 2-part invasion of the Japanese home islands. An enormous landing on Kyushu followed by an even larger assault near Tokyo. For Japan, this was the true nightmare. Not American troops in Hawaii or Alaska, but millions of Allied soldiers landing on the beaches of Japan itself. Tokyo responded with Operation Ketsugo, the decisive battle for the homeland. Every remaining division, every aircraft, every coastal gun, and even millions of civilians with improvised weapons would be thrown into a final, suicidal defense. The hope was brutal but simple. If the first waves of American troops died in terrifying numbers, maybe the United States would offer terms instead of insisting on total surrender. Atomic bombs, and the end of the last hope in 1945 shattered those expectations. American B-29s burned large parts of Tokyo and other cities with conventional firebombing. Even before the atomic bombs, whole urban districts had been reduced to ashes. Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the equation again. The bombs showed that the United States could destroy Japanese cities one after another without ever launching Operation Downfall at the same time. The Soviet Union entered the war against Japan and overran its forces in Manchuria at frightening speed. The vision of a single, concentrated, decisive battle on Japanese soil suddenly looked impossible. Japan risked being crushed from several directions at once. Behind closed doors, members of the Japanese leadership finally admitted what some had been saying for years. Continuing the war would no longer win them a better peace. It would only guarantee national destruction. What Japan's leaders really admitted after the war after 1945. Allied interrogators and historians went back over the decisions made in Tokyo. Again and again. A few key admissions surfaced. Japan's leadership never believed it could invade and occupy the continental United States. From the beginning, Tekno, Tatina, Longhua, American industry and resources would overpower them. Their strategy was to grab an empire quickly, fortify it, and force America to negotiate, not to plant a flag in San Francisco. Once Midway, Guadalcanal, and the production numbers made the outcome clear, Japanese planning turned from victory to survival. By the time of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Soviet declaration of war, even that survival plan had collapsed. There was no path to a negotiated settlement. No realistic hope that America would ever be vulnerable to invasion. The dream of beating the United States had died years earlier. The only question left was how long Japan would keep fighting after its leaders knew the truth.